one of us will struggle from time to time. Every one of us will have problems. We will face difficulty. We'll go through trials and temptations. There may even come a time when we have a crisis of faith. We start to doubt some things. The question is, what do we do? Where do we go when that happens? This morning I want to take a look at the story of Thomas. I feel bad for Thomas because I think he got a bad rap. He's known as Doubting Thomas. One story in the Bible, one time it happens where he doubts, and that's what he's known for 2,000 years later. Peter doubted. Peter tried to walk on water. He sank. Why don't we call him Sinking Peter? Faithless Peter. He denied Christ 3 times. He should be denying Peter. I think Thomas got a bad rap. But even though he got stuck with the bad name, his story is actually one that we can learn a lot from. In John 20, we have the story of the resurrection. Christ is raised up after 3 days. He starts appearing to people. We're going to pick up in verse 19. On the evening of that day, the first day of the week, the doors being locked where the disciples were for fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood among them and said to them, "Peace be with you." When he had said this, he showed them his hands and his side. Then the disciples were glad when they saw the Lord. Jesus said to them again, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, even so I am sending you." And when he had said this, he breathed on them and said to them, "Receive the Holy Spirit. If you forgive the sins of any, they are forgiven them. If you withhold forgiveness from any, it is withheld." So Jesus appears to the disciples. But if we continue on in the story, we find out that Thomas wasn't there. Now, we don't know why Thomas wasn't there. Don't know what he was out doing, what his excuse was. He was somewhere else at the time, but he wasn't there. At this moment, he's gone. Verse 24 and 25, now Thomas, one of the 12, called the twin, was not with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see in his hands the mark of the nails, and place my finger into the mark of the nails, and place my hand into his side, I will never believe." Is this unreasonable? You know, when we read this, we might be tempted to see a lack of faith in Thomas. He wouldn't believe what the disciples were telling him. He needed proof. Prove it to me. If this is true, show me. Where is he? I want to see him, and I don't want to see someone who looks like him. I want the guy that actually has the holes in his hands, the hole in his side. Let me see that. Otherwise, the story you're telling me, kind of out there, a bit too fantastic to believe. Why can't Thomas just believe what they're saying? You know, if we go back to verse 20, Thomas isn't there, and Jesus appears. Verse 20 says, when he had said this, he showed them his hands and his side. The disciples got the proof that they wanted. The disciples all got to see the wounds. Everyone except Thomas. What Thomas is asking for is the exact same thing all the rest of them already got. For most of us today, we take the resurrection just as a fact of history. It's something that happened, and if we've grown up in the church, we accept that fact for pretty much our whole lives. And so believing that Jesus was raised from the dead isn't too crazy for us. But right here, at this time, in this moment, when these disciples are in this room telling the story, it is an unbelievable story. Jesus is dead. We saw him dead. We saw him taken away and crucified on the cross. And all of us thought he was going to be king. We thought he was going to reign in Jerusalem. We thought he was going to be the Messiah who frees us and leads us and fights for us. And now that's over because we put him in a tomb. We sealed it with a large stone. And now they're all in the room with the doors locked for fear of the Jews, because everything we thought was going to happen, everything we believed in, has come crashing down. Now we're in danger. We got to figure out, what do we do? Where do we go from here? That's what they're all thinking. And Jesus appears. Jesus appeared to everyone except Thomas. Jesus breathed on all of them and gave them the Holy Spirit. All of them except Thomas. All the disciples now know that Christ has returned. He has risen. They are all now in a very different place mentally and emotionally than they were when they thought he was lying in the tomb. They're all different now. Everyone except Thomas. Thomas doubts, because at this point it is reasonable to have doubts. Maybe they're all playing a joke on me. I wasn't there and they come up with this joke for me. Maybe they saw someone who looked like him but wasn't really him. Maybe they drank some bad water and started hallucinating. I wasn't there with them. Who knows what it is, but I cannot get on board with what they're saying. I can't believe this is actually true. I'm going to need some proof. What Thomas did was he said it out loud. He expressed his doubt. I don't believe this. How many of us would have just had the doubt or kept our mouth shut? I don't know why you all believe what you believe, but I'm not going to rock the boat. I'm not going to be the weird guy that doesn't fit in with you. I'm not going to be the one-off. I'll just go along with this, even though I don't believe it. I think you're all crazy. Verses 26 through 29, 8 days later, his disciples were inside again, and Thomas was with them. Although the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hands. Put out your hand and place it in my side. Do not disbelieve, but believe." Thomas answered him, "My Lord and my God." Jesus said to him, "Have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." What I really want to focus on right here is verse 26. It says, 8 days later, his disciples were inside again, and Thomas was with them. Why is Thomas still with them? These people believe something that Thomas does not. All the disciples are now adhering to this story that Thomas does not think is true. After 8 days have passed, so much excitement had to be there. Those disciples had to be excited about what they have witnessed. Has the Spirit started directing them? Are they now making plans? Are they telling people about what they witnessed and what they've seen? What has dominated their conversation for the last week? What is the only thing those disciples can talk about? Thomas doesn't believe any of it. Why is he there? Why is he still with them? Unfortunately, what we sometimes see in the church is when there is a crisis of faith, when there is doubt, when we just can't see it the way everyone else sees it, I think the only thing to do is leave. I gotta leave. Maybe it's a parent losing a child. That can kick off a crisis of faith. That can be something that causes anger towards God. Questions about what God is doing. And the result is that sometimes people will just leave whenever there is a scandal. There is embarrassment. When we are suddenly singled out in some way, when we find ourselves isolated in the middle of a community, there's a tendency to pack our bags and go. We say, I don't belong here anymore. I don't fit in here anymore. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they're wrong. Maybe I can't see it their way. Maybe they just don't know what I have experienced. Either way, we are not on the same page anymore. I don't belong with these people. I'm going to go. 8 days later, Thomas is not on the same page as the rest of the disciples. He doesn't believe what they believe. I'm sure he wanted to think that what they're saying is true, but he was going to need more. I need more. I need proof. And yet, he's still there with them. He didn't leave. He stayed in his community. He stayed with his people. And even though he said, unless I see the wounds and touch the wounds, I'll never believe, he's not bailing out. He's still in. If you're going to doubt God with God. If you're going to have a crisis of faith, have it among people of faith. If your belief isn't there, then do it with people whose belief is there. The worst thing we can do when tragedy strikes, when faith fails, when doubting takes over, is leave. It's the worst thing we can do. 8 days later, they're all together, and Jesus appears again. Jesus appears, and this time Thomas is there. Jesus appears to the disciples, and Thomas is in the room, and Thomas finally gets what he needs. And the result is verse 28. Thomas answered him, my Lord and my God. Thomas did not find his belief out on his own. His issues weren't resolved while he was alone. He didn't have his doubts answered in a personal, private revelation. It was in a room with his people. He finally knew the truth. He finally got what he needed, because when Jesus appeared to the disciples the second time, Thomas was present. He was there to now see what they had already seen and to now understand what they already understood. Thomas said it out loud, and he stayed with his people. Unfortunately, the church has gotten a bad reputation for saying, don't say it out loud. Don't ask questions. There are a lot of stories out there of people leaving the church because when they were growing up, they started asking those hard questions, and somewhere along the way, a preacher, a teacher, whoever it was, said, accept it, stop questioning. Don't question it. Don't say it out loud. That is a terrible way to go about it. That is a terrible approach. As our faith develops, we're going to have questions. As we go through life, we're going to face struggles. We will, from time to time, find our faith not so strong. And it could be we even doubt. So what do we do about that? Where do we go? If you have doubts, if you don't believe, if you're just not on the same page as everyone else regarding your faith or some issue that you're struggling with, you should say it out loud in the youth group with them. And then keep on showing up and stay with them, because that is where Jesus is eventually going to show up and answer those doubts. Say it out loud in your life groups. And then keep showing up and stay with those life groups. Because eventually, that's where Jesus shows up and answers those doubts. Say it in the ladies' Bible study. Say it in the Bible class. Say it with the disciples, and then stay with the disciples. Because some time may pass, but eventually Jesus shows up and says, here you go. Here's what you need. Mark 9:20-24, and they brought the boy to him. When the spirit saw him, immediately it convulsed the boy, and he fell on the ground and rolled about, foaming at the mouth. And Jesus asked his father, how long has this been happening to him? And he said, from childhood. And it has often cast him into the fire and into water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us. Jesus said to him, if you can, all things are possible for one who believes. Immediately the father of the child cried out and said, I believe. Help my unbelief. I love this phrase. I believe. Help my unbelief. Sometimes we can have a hard time saying that. We would rather stick with, I believe, period. Nothing else needs to follow that. Don't worry about my unbelief. I'll struggle with my unbelief on my own. I'll struggle with unbelief in my own time, in my own way. No one needs to know about it. We don't need to talk about that. Let's not. Why are we so afraid to say it out loud? Why can't we say, help my unbelief out loud? I think it's probably for the same reason that today we refer to him as Doubting Thomas. The guy doubted one time and he stuck with that name forever. I don't want that to happen to me. I don't want to be known as Unbelieving Michael. Bad reputation to have. I don't want to be the odd man out, the one that can't get his faith where it should be, the one that's doubting the thing that everyone else believes is true. Everyone's going to look at me weird. Everyone's going to pass judgment on me. People are going to think less of me. It's going to get awkward. I'm just going to keep my mouth shut. Not say a word. Struggle on my own. We look at the story of Job. Job's friends come to him and they sit with him in the ashes. And they tell him, something's wrong with you. You have done something to deserve this. And he says, no, I'm not seeing it. I don't think I have. And Job is ultimately confused about the whole thing. He's not sure what's going on. But his friends, they're telling him how great God is, how good he is. God is righteous. God is perfect. God is a God of justice. They explain to him how God operates, what God does, what God does not do. And in the end, God condemns Job's friends. He blesses Job. Why is that? Job's friends are the ones who are preaching God's goodness and greatness. Job is the one questioning God. Job is the one doubting God's decision to allow all this stuff to happen. So how is it he can condemn the ones preaching his greatness, but here's the one who's questioning him, doubting him? He's the blessed one. You notice the conversations that they're having, going back and forth. Job's friends are all preaching to Job. They're playing the role of the theology professor, explaining God. But Job, sometimes he's talking to his friends, and sometimes he's just talking to God. Sometimes his arguments are actually prayers. He is pleading with God. He is crying out to God directly. When everything first happens to him, his wife has the famous line, curse God and die. Job doesn't do that. After all the bad stuff that happens, rather than saying, this makes no sense, this doesn't seem right, it doesn't seem just or deserving, so I'm out. Instead, he says all that to God. He doubts God with God. He's saying, I believe, but you got to help my unbelief. Because I'm not feeling it, I'm not seeing it, I'm not understanding it. I'm not leaving you. But I'm real shaky right now. Whether it's Thomas or Job or the father of the demon-possessed boy, or you. There will be times where we experience some doubt, some disbelief, some confusion, some hurt or pain, something in our life where we just can't quite get on board with what God is doing, something where we're just not seeing it the way everyone else is seeing it, something where we're just so confused, we're feeling real shaky. Thomas doubted, and Jesus showed up. The father of the boy said, "Help my unbelief." And Jesus cast out the demon. Job cried out in confusion, defending himself against God's actions. And God restored everything to him. It is okay to struggle with doubt. It is okay to have a crisis of faith. It is okay to question God. It is okay to not like what God is doing, as long as you're doing it with God right by your side the entire time. Thomas got his nickname, and we see it as a negative. Actually, the story behind it, a positive lesson that we can learn from. Because even though he doubted, he didn't leave. He stayed where he needed to be. He was still surrounded by the people who didn't doubt. He was a part of a community where Jesus was going to show up again and again and again and provide him with proof that he needed. If you're having a crisis of faith, if you're having doubts, if you're struggling with your spiritual walk, this is the place you're supposed to be in. These are the people you're supposed to be around. This is the community where Christ will eventually show up. But when he shows up, are you actually going to be there? Are you going to continue to be a part of the community? You have to be there when he shows up. Because if you say, "I don't fit in, I don't like this, I don't see it that way, so I'm out," when he shows up and all your answers are here, too bad you're not here. You have to be a part of the community. If God's going to satisfy your doubts, you have to be doing it